When it comes to space, too often, for too many years, our dreams of exploration and discovery were really squandered by politics and bureaucracy, and we knocked that out. So important for our psyche, what you're doing. It's going to be important monetarily and militarily, but so important for right up here, the psyche.
All right, so today we have on Cameron, an Afghanistan war veteran, author of Caveman to Philosopher, and a person on the spiritual path. And I guess I just want to say it's good to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I'd like to just start by asking if you could give us a bit more background on what it is you do and what you came on to talk to us about.
Yeah, so over the last couple of years, I've, as you said, been kind of on a spiritual path, trying to kind of rediscover myself, you could say. And in that process, I've read a ton of books on spirituality, whether it's Buddhism, Zen, Taoism, Hinduism, Christianity, and I've become kind of a student of religion. I believe that somewhere in the middle of those religions, there's some truth that we all need to find, but you can only find that kind of thing for yourself, and so that's what I'm doing now. But in that process, I've overcome things like PTSD, anxiety. I still deal with it, but I've found ways for myself to deal with it. And these are spiritual concepts or spiritual practices. But I believe that those things are becoming more mainstream. And so it almost is taboo to say that they're a spiritual practice. I think that they're just well-being practices. But what I do right now is I make podcasts and I'm writing. As you said, I wrote a book, trying to share that experience with people so that they can find what.
Okay, right on. Yeah, I've read a bit into different religions as well. Even with Zen, familiar with Alan Watts and like D.T. Suzuki. And also I'm working through reading the Quran now.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to get insight from all these different religions. So I'd want to start by asking you about your time in the military. Like, how long were you in for? Like, what was your trade? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I was in for 8 years, and my job was an infantryman, or 11 Bravo, for anybody that's military listening.
And that would be in the U.S.?
Yes. Yeah, in the U.S. Army. I was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington for a couple years, and then Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Okay, and how did you find your time in the military?
I've been on a bunch of podcasts here recently, and everybody asked me that question, and it's for me personally, I didn't really have a great time. Like, there were things about it that I liked, but as far as my liking it, or if I had a good time, I would not say that I did. There's a lot of things about the military that are just not conducive to the human experience. You really don't have freedom. You really don't get to do what you want to do. It's very much like locker room kind of behavior when you're on a football team and, the good old boys club kind of thing. It just wasn't for me. I thought I was there to do something. I thought I was there to be patriotic and whatever, but the entire time I was there, I didn't feel patriotic. It was just kind of like being bullied and harassed and not being able to have freedoms and then go.
Yep. Okay. And how was that? How long were you deployed?
So I was deployed from 2011 to 2012. So I was there for right around 12 months, if not over 12 months. So yeah, so it was interesting.
And what do you think you drew from that experience overall?
That experience helped me become who I am. So if there's, to be clear, even though I didn't really enjoy my time in the military, it doesn't mean that I didn't get value from it. So I 100% did. I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for my time in the military, because I became somebody while I was in the military that I later discovered that I didn't like being a person, right? I was, angry all the time. I was hateful. And when I got out of the military, I was able to see that is who I've become, and I had to let. So I am grateful.
Okay. You also mentioned a spiritual awakening that healed your PTSD. So could you tell us more about that? Yeah.
So kind of at the start of all of this for me, I guess probably to explain a little bit better is that when I was in the military, I was pretending to be somebody else, right? Like we're all pretending to be somebody. It's just a matter of like who you're pretending to be. At that time, I was pretending to be a GI Joe, right? I was pretending to be this soldier person. But then when I got out of the military, I had time to think. I had time to explore and time to myself. And it came to a point where I started asking myself, like, man, why am I so angry all the time? What is it that actually makes me happy? And like, can I do more of that? And then I started meditating, right? So I was kind of on this journey to lessen my suffering, to, fix physical and mental pain. And what ended up happening is I had this experience where I meditated and I had this out-of-body experience that I really can't even explain, like it may have been a hallucination, it may have been a dream, it's just too hard to tell. But in this place, wherever I went, it was in this like palace kind of thing in the sky, and I'm talking to this blue like Hindu god looking thing, and the next thing I know, it's like it kisses me on the forehead and it says everything's gonna be, and then the ceiling lights up into this bright white light, and then I woke up. I came out of it. And I had been meditating for a while, like before this happened, and nothing like that. So it was really bizarre to me that I'm sitting quietly and peacefully with my eyes closed, and then all of a sudden this experience happens. But it feels very real, much like a dream. And then I can't really explain it, but after that experience, I just had a better understanding of I was much more calm. I was much more relaxed. And it's kind of, if you've ever read, or if any of your audience has ever read or listened to near-death experiences, it's very similar. Not so much the experience like of mine, but like the fact that it feels like you're going somewhere, you see this bright white light, and you have a clarity that doesn't make sense. It's like kind of like, in the movie The Matrix, when he wants to know how to learn how to fly a helicopter, it's just like an instant download or something like that. It was kind of the same thing for me, is that I just had this feeling like of comfort, and that I had this understanding that I didn't have before.
That's interesting. Do you know what Hindu god that was?
I don't think that it was one. Like, I don't think it was like Shiva or any of the other ones. But I think what possibly was happening, it was just something that I needed to see, right? Like, whether it was a dream or my brain or my subconscious, whatever it was, I think that whatever I was seeing, it was being presented in a way so that I knew that it was important, right? Like, when I see this blue being, to me, what do I think? I'm thinking God, right? Like, that's, to me, that's, a God or something divine, especially since I could easily relate it to, the Hindu gods. I think that it was just a way of me understanding something that was much bigger than what I was currently doing.
Okay. And would you say the spiritual path was like a way to help you transition from military to civilian life?
Well, yes and no. I say yes because, obviously there is a transition of coming out of the military and being a civilian, but I think what happened to me is beyond that. Because to me, it's not about being a civilian, it's not being military, it's about being a human being, a better human being. And this experience made me a better human being, regardless of whether I was in the military or out. I think that the military was a catalyst for that kind of growth, because and this is something I do on my podcast, is I talk to other people who are having the same kind of experience, and all of our stories are uniquely the same. It always involves some kind of trauma, something that happens. I've talked to a lot of guys and gals that were ex-drug addicts. They were really deeply into drugs, and then that was their catalyst for a wing. For me, it was the immense suffering that I experienced while in the military, and being in war and having PTSD.
Okay. What are some of the different spiritual paths you followed to help you?
So yeah, that's a great question. So when I first started all of this, I started reading about Buddhism first. It just kind of happened, like it was one of those intuition things. I just saw this book and something about it rang to me. So I was like, well, I'm just going to trust my instincts, and I'm going to get this book and I'm going to read it. And it was the very first book on Buddhism that I ever read. And something about Buddhism just really stuck with me, and it made more sense than anything else. Then I started reading about Zen. Then I started reading about Hinduism. And then I kind of went back to Christianity. And for me personally, I think that a lot of the things that we see in the Bible are reflections of Eastern philosophies like Hinduism.
Okay. Have you looked into the occult at all?
Yeah, so that plays a huge part in it too, because like I said, and this is why I'm a student of religion, I think they all have meaning. I think all of it, the occult, all of the world's religions, I think that they all come from one place originally, and I want to find what that is. Like, if you dig, right, like you're asking me this, and it's probably because you've done your own research, there's dots that are clearly connected, right? Like, people today look at Christianity, but they don't know anything about old Christianity, like Gnosticism or the Essenes, right? All the way back, around the time of Jesus himself. A lot of people that are practicing Christians don't even know who the Essenes are and what important relevance they have.
Yeah, for sure. Well, isn't there the Tree of Life, at least in the occult? Like, it's kind of like that template for most philosophies or religions. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all. It has like 10 points arranged in a grid, and they correspond with 3 columns.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with that, but I've also seen things where I've seen that analogy, that Tree of Life analogy, from the Kabbalah, is which I believe what you're referring to.
Yeah.
I've seen that, and I've also seen that same thing lined up to be on the spinal column. So I've seen things where people talk about how it's this Tree of Life is your spinal column, right? And if you know anything about Hinduism, then you know about the Kundalini, and that to me makes sense.
Yep.
But again, those are 2 different things. Those aren't the same thing. So it's to me, that's where I like this research, because there are parallels that go back and forth in between, and it's like there was one original source of information, and everybody else kind of just went their separate ways, and now people like you and me are trying to go back and remember what it was.
Yeah, but it almost verifies the other sources in a way. Even though they differ a lot, you can still... There are enough similarities that you can tell that, oh, I'm on the right track with this, because if a dude over here on a separate continent was picking up the same ideas in a time when they had no way to contact each other, then there must be something to this,
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. There's so much mystery, and I think that there's so much that we just don't understand. I'm actually going to school right now. I'm also going to school. My major is history, because I love studying history too, because this is another piece of the puzzle. I feel like you can't really know all of the pieces of religious history if you don't know about actual history, world history. And then the trifecta, that's the third part of this, is anthropology, and archaeology, being able to understand, because it's almost like trying to look at it's when you're trying to understand the past and understand humans, if you're only looking at it from a one-dimensional view, which is, let's say religion, you're not going to get the whole outline. But if you add things like history, right, other history that's not just solely strict on religion, and anthropology through fossils, then you can start to have a 3D image of what it is you're talking about, as far as the people go and as far as time itself.
Yeah, for sure. And get more evidence as to what some of the culture might have looked like. Spiritual practices.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what spiritual paths would you say you currently follow?
It's kind of a mix of all of them. I don't think that there's one. For me personally, this is something that I've kind of dealt with, is, I like things about Buddhism, but then there's also things about Buddhism that I wouldn't do for myself, right? Like, for each individual person, they have to do what's right for them. And there are things about Buddhism that I think are basically like trying to run away. You know what I mean? Like, in Buddhism and others, there's lots of renunciation, which means like you give up something, right? You stop doing this thing. But I don't think that that's what this life is about. I think this life is about being Buddhist, but not turning anything away. I think it's learning how to be peaceful and loving and kind to other people. And every part of religion, if we took all the good parts of religion and formed it into one, I think we'd have something really good to work with. Because at the base level, like all you're talking about, like all these religions, what they're basically trying to tell you to do is there are rules and blueprints for how to live, based on a creator or the universal creator, whatever it is. But the rules themselves are not that bad, right? Like, it gets extreme, right? In some of the older religions, like when you've got all these different things, like, in Judaism, even down to the way that you dress and all these ceremonies. I don't know that that's necessarily what I'm saying. I think the simplest concepts: be kind to others, do good in the world, right? Treat everybody as God in drag, the way that you would want to be treated. And even philosophers.
Yeah, quoting Ram Dass there.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. He was the man, right? Like there's a reason that so many of us or so many people cling to people like Ram Dass and why he was so popular in his time.
For sure. What would you say are some of the lessons you gathered out of taking the spiritual path, and which one of your religious experiences or just diving into these different religions, which one resonated with you most?
Probably Zen. Zen for me, and it's absolutely strange to me because for most people, Zen is a very hard concept to understand, especially like if you listen to somebody like Alan Watts. It's very dense, it's very thick trying to understand the concept of Zen. But for me, it seemed very simple. Like once I learned about Buddhism, I'm like, okay. And then I constantly start hearing this thing Zen, and I'm like, all right, well, what is it? And so I started going and looking after that. And the reason why Zen is difficult for people to understand is because it's just so obvious, right? Like there's an old Zen saying, it's before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, right? Like I love those Zen sayings and those Zen koans and parables because it's really that easy. What is it saying? In that sentence, right? Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, right? So what does that mean? That's basically an analogy for your everyday life, right? So what are you doing in everyday life? Get up, go to work, go to school, right? Then after enlightenment, what do? Those very same things. But what is it saying?
You're just present for them.
Yes. You have awareness. You're there in the moment. Instead of thinking about everything else, right? Like being somewhere else in your mind, being present. That's the whole concept of like mindfulness, right? Like today in our woke world, like people think that mindfulness is like yoga or, something fancy on Instagram or something like that. It goes way over their heads, and it shouldn't. Mindful, right? Like what are we doing when you're walking somewhere, when you're sitting somewhere, whatever? Be where you are. Don't be in your head. That's it.
Yep. Just trying to appreciate what's around you.
That's right. Appreciate the beauty.
Okay. How did you get to writing a book out of your experiences and following a spiritual path?
Well, I basically, after I had those experiences, the ones I'd shared with you earlier, my meditations and all of that, I just had, like I said, I had this understanding that I can't really explain. I just did. I had this wisdom that came out of it. And I just knew that I couldn't ignore this. And it wasn't right for me to have this and not share it with people. Now, that was my original thought, but then continuing on my journey, what I've come to realize is that everybody that has this kind of spiritual awakening, they feel the same way. That's why there's so many, Ram Dass, Alan Watts, right? There's so many books. There's so many things that people are already doing. It's because everybody feels the same way, right? When we're living in our human heart, we want to help the world. We want to be compassionate, and we want to care for these other people because they are reflections of us. But it's this double-edged thing. I realize that even if I write a book and I do all these things, not everybody's going to listen. Not everybody's going to read it. Not everybody's even going to care. But for the ones that do, that's who I wrote it for, right? That's why I did it. For even if it's just a handful of people that just want to understand this world a little bit better and reduce their suffering to get through this life, that's what I did it for.
Okay. What would you recommend for people as just a daily practice they could do to reduce suffering?
I mean, the classic one is obviously meditation, right? Like, and here's the thing. People who don't meditate or who, have tried and failed, listen, this is the best indicator, right? Like, people talk to me all the time about meditation, and the number one thing they say is, I can't sit still, right? Like, I can't sit still for 5 minutes or whatever. And listen, that right there is an indication that you need meditation, right? The problem is that our brains, especially here in the West, were hardwired to constantly be doing something, right? What is that? That's anxiety. That's a byproduct of anxiety. We live in a country that is filled with anxiety because of our constant wanting to grow and to win, right? We don't know how to turn that off. We've never known how to turn that off. The only people that know how to turn that off are the people in the East who've been doing it for thousands of years that we just kind of brush off as, lunatics or whatever. But listen, 5 minutes a day, sitting somewhere quiet or somewhere in nature and just allowing yourself to be, that is the best medicine you can give yourself to learn how to deal with all of this stuff that's going on constantly in your head. Go to your therapy, take your medications, do those things, right? Do what you got to do for you. But I'm telling you, if you want a very simple thing that can alleviate some real suffering in your life, it's meditation.
is there any specific kind of meditation you do or you recommend? Like, at the beginning, I know a lot of practices recommend just counting breaths to 10 and then restarting and counting to 10 and maybe doing that for like 5 minutes a day or something like that. What would you say is a good routine to get someone into meditation?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a great one, right? Counting your breath. That's a classic. Honestly, another good one is those guided meditations, right? Like you can go on YouTube and find like a nice guided meditation where somebody's kind of like walking you through that. I think those are really helpful for beginners because it's still really not you. Because what is the point of meditation, right? The point of meditation is to dissolve into nothing, right? To stop being somebody that's so important that you're so anxious. So when you're listening to somebody else talk and they're telling you to calm down, that's an easy way to start. But the goal should be to get away from somebody telling you how to meditate and you doing what I just said, which is to sit there and melt away, to become nothing.
Okay. So what could we do to prevent those things from becoming like a crutch in some kind? Like those guided meditations or counting breaths, right? Because at a certain point, if you have a certain proficiency with them and you try and drift away, and your results would diminish, I'd assume, right? Because you'd be going to like a new phase, almost like a harder chapter. How would people be able to transition or make that transition smoother?
I would say, and this is like typical Taoism, is to not make it painful. Don't make it stressful on you. Don't even worry about that. Like you'll know, right? Like you'll know when the time is right. Use it as long as you need to. Because there's nothing wrong with a crutch. Everybody's got them, right? Like even meditation itself is a crutch, right? Like it's, we've been talking about Ram Dass, right? He talks about getting caught in your methods, and that includes spiritual stuff, right? Spiritual stuff isn't any different. It's still stuff you cling to. It's still stuff you identify with. Meditation just helps you calm down. It just helps you, and there's all these other people that do things with meditation and they say they can go places and like all this other stuff. All of that is true. Meditation, it doesn't have a one size fits all either practice or meaning, right? Like it doesn't mean you have to just sit there and be quiet, right? Like if your mind wanders and you go to this place out of your body, like I had mentioned earlier, dude, let that happen. Experience it. If you just need to calm down and be quiet, calm down and be quiet. And whatever you need to do that, use it for what you need. Because there's no time limit. You know what I mean? Like you're not in a rush to become enlightened.
Do you think psychedelics have a role to play in people's spiritual path?
Yeah, I think that it's like a catalyst, right? Like, I think everybody's, some people have their awakenings through psychedelics, right? And why? Because they're powerful and they're traumatic. Just like an experience of PTSD or a near-death experience, right? Like some people take psychedelics and then have near-death experiences. I know people, quite a few people who have done different types of things and had near-death experiences that made them come out of that experience less afraid and just grateful to be alive.
So I'm guessing the general momentum towards psychedelic legalization has you excited?
Yeah, yes. I don't know that I would use the word excited. I think it should be legal. I don't think people, I definitely don't think anybody should be in prison for that. I don't think people should have been persecuted for that. I think that just like all things, like we do need to monitor. We do need to find ways to regulate it. I don't even like that because I'm not a big fan of government regulating anything. But I do think like we do need to find ways to be responsible, right? And like that's why like ayahuasca trips, right? Like they have guides, like most people don't just go do ayahuasca. They have a guide. They have somebody that can help them go through that experience. And I think that stands for the same thing. Like you need somebody to guide you through that experience. Otherwise, it could be terrifying and completely ruin the chance of you becoming spiritually well.
So somewhat of a more liberal prescription system almost, but with the guarantee that there would be a therapist or like psychoanalyst present during the experience?
Man, no, I realize how I said that, and I am not, like I said, I'm not for like government relation. I just think that we need to go back to the old school, right? Like a shaman. There's a reason shamans exist. There's a reason why those, like, I don't even know what you call them, like trip guides. That's why those people exist, right? Like,
Yeah,
you don't
trip
just,
sitter, yeah.
exactly, right? Like, you don't just go whitewater rafting if you've never done it before, right?
Yeah. What's your opinion on if the trip sitter is like your buddy that just done like mushrooms or whatever since they're like 15, if it's just like a hippie person but they know what they're doing, they're experienced, what would your opinion be on that situation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, that's to me is more appealing than some kind of government regulation where like a therapist is making.
Okay. So just kind of more a relaxed setting, just as long as someone that knows what they're doing is there.
Right. Yeah. I just don't think people should be able to go to the store and do it without some kind of supervision or help.
Okay, I see. Another thing I wanted to ask, what's it like being an author these days, just in general? Do you have to do like your own marketing? Do you have a publisher that you go through? What's that process like?
Yeah, so for me, it was pretty simple. I self-published, and I went through a company called 48 Hour Books, and the process was easy. You pay a fee for a package. I have all the copies of my books, so I sent them out, and I give them out to people. I promote it on all of my social media pages. That I did that on purpose for my first book because I don't have I don't have a huge audience to give it out to. So that's kind of what I'm doing is I got this first book and I wanted to get this done to give out to people to kind of build my name on that. And then other books I write in the future, I'll have an audience for that, for me to kind of grow on. But as far as the process went, it was very simple. I can't complain. The real thing, and any author will tell you, is that the biggest problem is just getting people to read your book because hardly anybody reads these days.
Okay. That's too bad. What do you think we could do to get people more interested in reading?
Get rid of cell phones.
Would you say it's cell phones that are the issue or social media?
Yeah, you made an excellent point right there. Social media is certainly the problem. I mean, the phone is part of the problem too, because what are you reading a book for, right? Like usually one of three things, which is you just like to read, you're trying to get some kind of information, or you're trying to learn. Well, I guess that's the same. So probably two primary reasons, right? You're trying to learn something, or you do it because you like it. But the thing is, though, one of those is already taken out because you got a phone. Like anything you need to know, you can pull up your phone and find it. So there's no point in spending, days and weeks reading a book when you could just find it in 3 seconds on your phone.
Yeah.
Unless you like it.
I found that way of learning gets you a limited, I don't know how to describe it. Your knowledge is just limited in that case. You're right. Just a bunch of different spots of a topic, but you don't really have a proper overview of the subject.
Right. What you're talking to is like knowledge, right? Our knowledge is shrinking because we don't rely on our own thinking mind to have that knowledge anymore. We rely on our phones for that, rely on computers for that. So yeah, who knows what effect that's going to have on us moving forward in the future, and that's why so many people talk about like this AI singularity thing where you merge your consciousness with internet, right? Because then you wouldn't have to know anything. You would just know everything. You would have access to this of information. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't know that that's wise or smart on humanity's part, but I get the appeal, right? Like we're limited because if we want to know something, we have to learn it. And knowledge has a price, right? Like it takes time, it takes effort, it takes work. But if you do this thing, you merge your brain or your consciousness or whatever, which I don't even know is possible, merge your consciousness with some kind of AI device, and then you have access to unlimited info. But I don't see that being a thing.
Yeah, also with what's on the internet, like if you've been on 4chan, you don't want to merge your consciousness with what's on the internet.
Yes, you're 100% right.
Is there anything you want to add in general? Just message for people interested in like where they can find you, where they can find your book, stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I go there, though, can I ask you a question?
For sure.
Okay. So this is a philosophy I've been working and building on. I'm obviously not the first person to come up with it. I'm just somebody that is talking. But I want you to think about the universe. Okay, I want you to think about everything in it. I want you to think about all of the stars, the planets, the sand on the beach, the water, the ocean, the air, okay? Is there anywhere in the known universe where nothing exists?
I mean, in my head, if I want, I guess. I don't know. There's nowhere else I've experienced nothing.
Right. I mean, but we use that word all the time, right? Like in our daily lives, and when we're talking about things, when we're talking about objects and stuff like that, we see nothing all the time. Like we act like it's this thing, but there's nowhere in the universe where nothing exists. There's always something. Even if you point into a vast black void in space, that's still something. So now here's the question. If there is no such thing as nothing, how could you have something from nothing? Right? And what am I talking about? I'm talking about the Big Bang, right? Like how can you have a Big Bang from absolute? So then the question is, if there's no such thing as the Big Bang, if it didn't happen that way, is it possible that this existence, what we're living in, has always existed?
Well, what do you mean by exist? Because, I mean, as a thought, like the mathematical definition of zero does exist, right? It is nothing.
Right, but you're talking about an idea. I'm talking about like actual in existence, right? What is manifest? What is manifest outside of your thought? Because you can, I mean, but even then, try to imagine nothing right now. Try to imagine what nothing looks like.
But it's all really subjective, though. I'm limited by just human knowledge in general, right? Because if I look at just a space of air, right, without the knowledge that there are particles of air in this space, then I would probably define that as nothing, right? So,
but we know
whatever I would define as nothing would be limited by my knowledge.
Right, but you mentioned a good point there. You know that there are particles and atoms and electrons and bacteria. You know all of that's in the air. So then you go out in space, right? Well, we know that this is still the same thing, right? It's just void of oxygen, but that doesn't mean that there's not dark matter, antimatter, space dust, all of it, right? Like
Neutrinos,
Right. So there's just nowhere where that exists, right? Even a black hole. People try to argue with me about this all the time. They're like, well, a black hole has got a vacuum. That doesn't, of the vacuum itself, right? It's not, we have no reason to believe that even inside of a black hole there's nothing, because we don't know. We haven't even actually been inside of a black hole. So anyways, my point is there's just something to think about. This is the kind of work that I do. I want people to expand their mind. I want people to think about hard questions that they're not usually challenged with, right? Most people in their day-to-day are answering work calls and, school emails or whatever, but how often do we think about these big, challenging questions?
Okay. Well then, to end this off, I want to ask you, what would you say is the meaning of life?
I would say the meaning of life is, in the simplest way I can explain, is the Zen parable I mentioned earlier, right? Chop wood, carry water. You're already doing it. Your purpose in life is what you're already doing right now. The only thing that makes you think that it has to be something bigger, like being a lawyer or a cowboy in space or whatever it is our egos, our individual identities. We want to be something important, even if we're not. But your purpose doesn't have to be this big, grandiose thing. Your purpose is just existing. You're already doing it.
That's a great answer. It was great having you on. I'm glad we could talk. It was really interesting to be able to pick someone's brain about spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. If anybody wants to find me or get any information from me, just look up my name. You can even Google my name, Cameron Harmon, Harman. You'll find me. You'll find my book and all that stuff.
In a gentle way, you can shake the world. It is Gandhi and such inspiring figures that push us to step in the right direction. The direction of truth, acceptance, trust. We are powerful together. Together we can build tomorrow. The tomorrow needs. The tomorrow we choose. One full of growth, change, equality. A tomorrow full of the Moonbase podcast.